Hi, this is Marta from Ruby Soup with Pearl Juice, and today I am bringing you a review of Saga Volume 8, written by Brian K. Vaughan and illustrated by Fiona Staples. Now, this volume is just the newest one released in this series, and if you haven't read Saga or you haven't read Volume 7 of Saga, then I recommend that you don't watch this video. You go and read the series first, and then you can come back. Because Volume 8 picks off directly where Volume 7 ended. Volume 7 ended with that Alana miscarried. And Volume 8 is essentially Alana's and Marco's attempt to find a doctor who can help her with a procedure of removing the remains of the dead fetus that she has inside of her. Because due to their interspecies romance, then the dead fetus is causing all sorts of havoc inside of Alana's body, and they have to remove these parts before things get too much out of hand. And the volume also has a story about Prince Robot's son Square, who decides to go out and get food for him and Gus and the journalists that are waiting for Alana's and Marco's and Prince Robot's return. Before I continue with the review, I have to give out some content warnings. Of course, there's a lot of violence in this comic, but there's also a trigger warning for miscarriage, and if that might potentially upset you, then I would not read this. So, as I have talked before on this channel, Saga is one of these comics that not only is very mainstream, but it has such well fleshed out, multi-layered, complex characters, and it is really diverse. Both Lana and Marco are people of color. When this comic began, Alana and Marco were star-crossed lovers that were on the run. It takes this concept and is able to not only show how complex war is and all the gray areas that occur during war times and the difficult choices that people have to make, but it also takes up all sorts of very interesting philosophical and political themes and really explores them in very thoughtful and very deep ways. What is very admirable about Saga is that Brian K. Vaughan is able to take things that very few comics would actually talk about and actually explore them. And for instance, in Volume 7, a thing that I thought was very interesting is how this volume explored blind fate and how they were able to weave that message about how you shouldn't have blind faith and you shouldn't put your whole family in danger under the guidance of what you assume is fate, in such a way that was not only like really heartbreaking, but also like felt very natural, and like it wasn't just an ASAP for an ASAP's sake. It was like a natural flow of the story. As I mentioned, Alana has miscarried. And the thing about miscarriage in most mainstream media and pop culture is that it is often used as a way to kind of like to be melodramatic or to have tragedy for the sake of tragedy. And it's not really handled with respect, and it's very often handled very much in bad taste. Like a lot of movies are really infamous for this, and I'll just give an example. Gotham, despite that I really like that show, Gotham did this very infamously where Jim Gordon's girlfriend has a miscarriage and we never get the girlfriend's point of view on that, and it's kind of like this drop there and then it's like never brought up again, and it was really odd. Like the writing was particularly bad about that. But this is by no means just Gotham that does this. Like almost every TV show and movie, as soon as they bring up miscarriage, it is almost like a side note or just there for shock value. And Saga averts this completely. This whole volume is not only about the aftermath of miscarriage, but also about like how Alana and Marco deal with the miscarriage, and also how Hazel deals with the miscarriage. I had never seen that before, actually. I had never seen miscarriage actually discussed and talked about and actually weaving into a story like that before. All the other depictions I had seen had mostly had it as a melodramatic side note. And the thing is that when it comes to, for instance, real life, miscarriages are a lot more common than what we think. I read once in a magazine called Vårdguiden, which is like a Swedish magazine that kind of tells people informative informations about diseases and health and such. And they had a special on miscarriages, and I read there that they said that about 25% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. But it is so taboo and so misrepresented and underrepresented in our culture that we don't really talk about it. And here in Saga, Hazel's narration says the same thing. Hazel's narration says that miscarriage not only is very common, but it is incredibly painful. And Brian K. Vaughan really brings that sentiment to life. We not only see like the messy stuff that Alana's body is going through, like the trauma that her body has to goes through and is trying to cope with after having a miscarriage, but we also see Alana feeling guilt and even Marco feeling guilt. Them both dealing with grief, not knowing how to talk about it with Hazel. I was just blown away when I was reading this comic because I was just so surprised with how the comic pulled it off, and that the comic actually averted one of these worst cliches that we have in media. And even besides that, there's a really interesting theme in here about children and how children cope with identity. Both Hazel and Square have problems with their identity, especially when it comes to relating to their parents. Hazel is one of the first ones of her kind because she's a cross between winged creatures and horned creatures, and she has anxiety about her body. A lot of children, when they're growing up, they have anxiety about their bodies and they don't really know always like what's going to happen to their bodies, and it can be quite scary. And Hazel struggles with wondering what's going to happen to her when she starts growing up. Is a very good metaphorical representation of that kind of anxiety. And Square, for his part, he has trouble knowing, because he's a exiled prince, and his father is kind of telling him like, well, you know, our people are like this and that, and our people, we rescue maidens, we are knights. And since they are exiled, Square doesn't really know how to take all of this information that his dad is teaching him about their culture and how to actually live it out, because they are in fact exiled. And he also talks to Gus about not really being so sure how to relate to his father, because he is quite certain that his dad has done terrible things during the war. And that is a trope that I personally really enjoy. I love stories about children who are trying to cope with the fact that their parents have done questionable things. Like, for instance, a really good novel that deals with this is The Dewbreaker by Edwin Gedundicut. And even Steven Universe, a cartoon, kind of dealt with a similar issue where the children of some parents deal with shocking news that their parents have actually done something terrible in the past. I'm very excited to see what they do with that theme later on in future issues, because it was very brief in this, but it was still very intriguing. I think that Saga is just getting better and better with each volume. It's taken up even like more daring issues. I am really happy that Saga is such a brave comic, and I guess like this is one of the reasons why we love science fiction, that science fiction is able to discuss issues that other genres maybe wouldn't be able to. So that was my review of Saga Volume 8. I highly recommend it. Have you guys read Saga Volume 8, or are you guys Saga fans? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Comment down below. Let's get a conversation started. If you like this video, click the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.